Tina, thank you so much for coming on. I know you have an inspirational story, an inspirational journey that we all want to hear about because a lot of my friends, including myself, have had narcissistic people in their life. So can you go ahead and before we dive deep into it, explain what you have learned, what lessons you have learned through this whole experience?
Absolutely. I think the one primary thing I have learned is that you can't change a narcissist. I had always kind of internalized, like, well, and I think my mother kind of instilled this in me as a child as well, that, well, if I don't do this, I won't provoke them. Or if I'm better, they'll be better to me. It doesn't matter what you do. I often liken it to, an alcohol with an addiction. You can have an intervention. You can have all these reasons why they should stop with alcohol. But if they don't see it themselves, it's not going to happen. The problem is narcissists are completely incapable of acknowledging that there's anything wrong with them. Their ego cannot withstand that. So they truly feel justified in everything that they do to people, even when they know they are causing you harm in whatever way. And they use a variety of ways. They have zero remorse. They think they are completely justified doing what they're doing to you.
Let me ask you, and that I just thought about it, is are narcissistic people born that way, or is it a behavior that is actually learned?
Well, that's a debate, actually.
Yeah.
And some people even think they're aliens, but we're not going to go there. I'm sure there's life outside of us, but I'm not sure that's what narcissists are. But there is a nature versus nurture theory. I even met somebody once and I just had a hard time with this. She said the first time she held her daughter, she looked in her eyes and knew she was a narcissist. And I just have a hard time believing
Yeah,
that.
right.
I'm more on the nurture side because from what I have seen, and I have been what they call a narcissist magnet, I've dealt with many of the nastier ones. What I have seen is they come from two ways of life. Either they were abused or neglected as children themselves. Therefore, they need to feel important. They need to feel superior to other people to feel what they didn't feel growing up. But so in that way, it's a very deep-seated insecurity. It's just a shame that they would go to the extent that they would harm others as they were harmed in order to achieve that. On the opposite and very different end of that, one narcissist in my life, actually now I'm thinking about it too, they were raised by the loveliest people ever. Just the nicest parents. They were encouraged, I think too much so. And I have seen that in other, I hate to say, I can kind of see now in children when they get to about third, fourth, fifth grade, you can kind of tell their tendencies. And I have seen where parents can be a little over indulgent and over encouraging to the point where their children actually think they really are above all others, and the rules don't apply to them because they get everything they want and they don't have to, everything is better for them and life is wonderful, and I wish it was that way for all, but they actually think they are superior, and then they expect then in their adult life basically for everybody to bow to them and fulfill all their dreams and desires because they're entitled to that and nobody else is.
Yes, you as well. So if somebody is dating somebody and they have no clue, because sometimes they can hide it very well. They have no clue what is happening. So how can we protect ourselves whenever we're extending in this relationship not knowing?
Well, here's the thing about that. I get asked that a lot. And I know there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, here's the red flags and here's a list. The problem is this. What's a red flag to you might not be a red flag to me. There are people in other cultures where, there are ways of life that are different than ours. And my way isn't any better than yours or any others. So I always tell people the best advice in dating is to follow your gut. If something feels off, even if you can't put your finger on it, listen to that. Because think about this. whether it's at work or social situation, maybe it's within your family, you meet people in life, and it's very rare, but you meet people that you just click with. It's like you've known the person forever. They can finish your sentences. You don't have to explain yourself. They just get you and you get them. And what a beautiful thing that is. But for some reason, when we go out in the world dating, we want it to happen right now. So we're trying to force situations with people we know we don't have any business being with. And we excuse, enable, and tolerate, which are all the things my mother did in her marriage, which I always said I was never going to do in my adult life, and I ended up doing. But those are the things that get you in trouble, because you have to just listen to what feels right to you. You know, whatever it is about this person, even if they seem lovely and perfect, we have to remember Ted Bundy was a serial killer and rapist with a lovely lady and a daughter at home who adored him, yet he was charming and handsome and luring women, because who would think anything of it? And that's the thing about these people. They are in our communities, they're coaching your little league, they're at your churches, they're, you know, volunteering for things. They seem humble and charitable, and they're funny, and nobody would ever think anything of it, including you. But it's very unfortunate that the reality of it is very different when you are the one that's with them.
All right, so let's talk about your book, okay? And it's
Okay.
called Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse. I absolutely love that title, by the way.
Thank you.
But whenever I was reading it, it was almost like, you know, I was like seeing what you saw, feeling what you felt, and really just wanting each page to make it better for you. I just want to say, come on, I'm here
Yes.
reading for you. So what made you feel like, you know what, I want to get my story out into the world?
I think it was exactly that, because I didn't have anyone in my life that saw what was happening. There were a couple people over the 25 years that I kind of said something to. I remember, I'll never forget one person, a friend of the family, pulling me aside, and all she said was, "When are you going to get rid of this guy?" And I'm like, no, 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 I don't know what you're talking about. You know, I played it off, because the thing about it is, when you're being abused, and you may not be walking around with black eyes or anything, but there are so many types of abuse, especially in a romantic relationship, and people know about verbal and physical and psychological. They forget there's legal abuse and financial abuse and all these other sexual abuse. Even in a marriage, you can have non-consensual sexual relations. It's awful. But you never want to expose your abuser. You never want, you know, to be the one who outs them, because what are the consequences going to be then? So it's a very scary thing to feel. You keep it to yourself. You kind of hold that within you. And I know a lot of people feel shame about it. I never really felt the shame of it so much as I was just scared. I was just scared for anybody to really know what was going on. And I felt dumb, because everybody loved this guy. You know, who would believe me? So it's something that when I got out of it, and, you know, the other part of this too is that there were a lot of rules. When you're with a narcissist, they will control you in every way possible. And my ex didn't like me being on the computer. He didn't like me on the internet. I didn't even have a smartphone until, you know, he had moved out right before the divorce. So I really didn't have this exposure to the world. He moved me out 90 miles away from the city and anything and everyone I knew. So I'm in this podunk town, you know, with basically no outreach to the rest of the world. So I didn't know that narcissistic abuse was a thing. So when I realized I was not the only one, I also acknowledged that my story is far from the worst ever. It is just a very minor example, but I was looking for books. I was looking for information. You can find how-tos and lists and, you know, red flags, what to avoid, but nobody was sharing their story. Why? Because people are scared. I think I found maybe 3 or 4 books where people told their story. And so it was really important to me after I listened to my very first podcast ever, actually. And it was a podcast about narcissistic abuse, and a woman told her story. And I literally was like mind blown. I'm like, she literally could have lived my life. We were exactly the same people living exactly the same circumstances. Like, how could this be? How it just, I didn't understand that they all actually have a pattern of behavior that they follow. So if this was just happening, if this wasn't just happening to me and it wasn't just happening to her, I thought, how many more people is this affecting? And I think that if I had known, if I had listened to that podcast, or if I had read a book like mine earlier on, I would have gotten out earlier. Maybe I would have saved myself from becoming autoimmune because of all the cortisol running through me. Maybe I would have saved myself from this lung syndrome that I have now the rest of my life, which is the scratchiness you hear in my voice. Never smoked a cigarette ever in my life, never smoked anything. Yet here I am with a lung syndrome that the doctors say is like having fibromyalgia and COPD at the same time, which was a direct result of living in fight or flight mode for so many years. So I just thought it was imperative for people to understand you are not doing anything noble for your children by staying. You are not doing any service to yourself, or to God, because faith was a big part of it for me too. You are not doing anything but killing yourself inside every day that you stay in those circumstances. And I think people need to know it. They need to hear it. And people that even maybe haven't experienced it need to know what it looks like. So maybe they can save their daughter or their niece, or I hate to say it, it happens with men too. Save your kids, save other people from having to endure all this.
And I absolutely love it. Whenever I was reading your book, I was thinking this lady is a survivor.
Thank
Because
you.
what you were doing was, I know that you said that, everybody needs to get out. And sometimes though, it's very, very difficult
Yes.
because you're in this, like you said, you're scared, and especially if you have a child.
Yes.
And you're trying to protect the child, and you want to, so it's almost like you're in survival mode. And yes, eventually it does catch up with you with your health and everything. But I can see that during that time, you're in survival mode. So you're not really seeing yourself,
Right.
hurting yourself, that you're saying, you know what, I'm surviving. And the one thing that you said in your book is that you always need a people that you can talk to, somebody to support you.
Yes.
And like you said, he isolated you where you're out in nowhere and you're away from your family. So what kind of advice can you give somebody that when they do feel like they're alone, what can they do?
I think as hard as it is, if I looked back, like I said, there were people notice things. I remember even once being at church on a Sunday, and I'm Catholic, so communion takes forever. You're just sitting there on your knees waiting. But a woman an older lady that sat in the pew behind me saw, I mean, to say I was sad and melancholy all the time was an understatement. Sometimes I would just sit there and tears would come out because I could release them in that safe environment, in that safe space where I couldn't at home. And I didn't want my son to see me like that. But she just came behind me and squeezed my shoulder. It was just that, like, I see you, I feel you, I'm here. She didn't say one word, but I knew she was there. And, now it's been 3 years and 4 months since the divorce, but this elderly lady and I have become wonderful friends. She's been, a sort of mother figure to me, and she's kept her eye out for me. And,
Okay.
so these people are there. I think that we are just so focused on what is going on, and we're so used to being told you can't, you shouldn't, you won't, we can never do. Everything's negated. So you just assume you can't talk to anybody. And again, when you do go to people, like, I mean, honestly, I know I'm estranged from my mother, and that's a whole other book that's coming out this year. But the prequel to Gasping for Air kind of discusses that relationship, which is basically what set me up for this adult relationship in my first marriage. But, I did go to her because it's my mother. And I thought, okay, she won't rat me out. She won't, and I said something to her, and you know what she said to me? Well, you married him, you made a commitment, so you need to honor that. And she even witnessed twice abuse happening. And one incident involved my son, who she put in a car with my ex-husband. We were married then, but my son was only 6 years old, and she put him in a vehicle with my husband, who was blatantly slurring words drunk. And so be careful who you tell, because it's not just that some people won't believe you. Like if I had gone to other people that I knew, that knew my husband and liked him, they would have never believed me. And honestly, to this day, even after everything, I have had people come to me and say, I read your book, but I know you both and I don't believe you. I can't believe you would do this to him by writing this book. And I'm like, that's amazing to me, to victim shame me when I'm the one who suffered in so many ways. But, that's fine. The thing is, you can't control what other people think and do. You can only control what you do. So I agree with you when you had said before, yes, of course, we all want people not to be in these situations. However, it's not always safe to just leave. It took me 15 years to get out, and I was planning the whole time. But during that planning, I had to pretend everything was okay. And I had to somehow take everything so that it would save my son from having to see things and hear things that he shouldn't see and hear. And he never even heard a half of what went on in that house. He still, to this day, almost 21 years old, doesn't even know half of what I endured in that house, nor do I want him to read the book, nor will he. And that's how it should be, because this is between me and his dad. But there are so many people out there who are suffering even worse abuses than what I did. And that's what worries me. But unless somebody is safe, and I think if we can just provide that safe place for them in whatever way we can, by, if you sense somebody's going through something, even if it's just like the elderly lady did with me in church, just squeeze their arm or their shoulder and just say, are you okay? Because they're probably not. And I remember somebody else in my life had asked me, it was actually one of my doctors asked me, how are you doing? Simple question when he walked in the room, and I broke down crying. And you can tell when something's wrong. So
Oh,
I just
absolutely.
tell people to be on the lookout for that. Be careful also not to overstep your bounds and intervene, because that person might suffer if you go too far by alerting somebody else or alerting authorities or doing wellness checks. We don't want to do that. But something as simple as sharing the link for this podcast in a text and say, gosh, I listened to this. It's really interesting. You should give it a, next time you're on your way doing groceries or picking up the kids at school, give this a listen. It was really interesting to hear, because you know what? Then it's not coming from you. It's non-confrontational. They can listen to 5 minutes. They can listen to the whole thing, but maybe something will start kind of resonating with them that, oh my gosh, it's not just me. It's not, this is something that happens to people. This is, the potential consequence of it. So that's really what we want to aim to do, is just let them know they're not the only ones.
Absolutely. So how did you find the everyday courage that you needed to make it each day?
For me, I think everybody has that thing that motivates them. And if you ask somebody, not everybody can tell you what it was. For me, though, it was my son. I always said that the sun rose and set around my son. He was my world. He was my universe, because he was my one joy in life. He was the one good thing that I was putting out into this world. And I never wanted him to be here without me. And so I just felt like, even though we had to stay in those circumstances longer than I would have liked, it was really important for me to just show him what strength was, and show him, not just strength, but that, even though I think I was overcompensating more at times and faking it, he needed to see that no matter what somebody said or did to you, you were going to go out in the world with a smile on your face, and you were still going to work hard, and you weren't going to let this person have the power and energy over you to determine who you were and what you're worth and what you can and cannot do. And even though I did, he didn't see that. And so I think there was some, strength even in myself, even though I was trying to show it to him, and kind of like that fake it till you make it. it was for him, but it still affected me to the point where I felt bold enough to ask myself eventually, like, what do I want? Because this isn't it. I mean, we all know when we feel unsettled or sad or, just at any kind of unrest in our life, and this is regardless of abuse or, relationships, that is your soul telling you something isn't right here. You're not living authentically. And I think it's just like our gut when we meet people, we don't listen to it. And I think that when I finally just kind of talked out loud to myself and just said, what is it that you want, Dana? Because this is not it. And I knew right away, because we all know what's really, close to our hearts. We all know what we want our life to look like if there were no boundaries. A 5-year-old might say she wants to ride a unicorn over rainbows. And you know what? Let her think she can. That's a beautiful thing. Don't we all want to do that? I just wanted to be a writer and use my degree in journalism. And I did want to help other victims of abuse. And I wanted to heal. And I wanted to even be married, just not to him, So I think it was like once I saw that vision and I remembered who I was and I remembered what I wanted, everything changed. Because you can't ignore what's in your heart. You can't ignore those things that speak to you and speak to who you really are, at the core of your being. And so I just challenge everybody, do that. I don't care where, even if you're perfectly happy in your life, just ask yourself, what do you want? Because let me tell you, it's been 3 years and 4 months since my divorce. There were 2 domestic violent incidents after the divorce, but I am still here standing, not as a brag, but to say, I wanted to be a writer. I have already published a book. I have 2 more books being published this year. Never in a million years would I have thought that would happen. I have remarried somebody whose family I've known almost 20 years, and he's just my gentle giant. He's an amazing human being who doesn't understand anything of what I've come from and what I've endured, but he loves me and he sees worth and value in me that I didn't even see in myself for so long. And he treats me like a princess. I never thought I was capable of even attracting a man like that who would treat me well. I thought I was broken and damaged and all these terrible things we tell themselves, but, even the healing aspect, even 2 years ago, I might be crying in the fetal position in the dark for days over something somebody might have said, or, some offense or I took, or whatever it is. And now I can, I'm good enough to know that, like, I'm good. Like, you don't have to like me. You don't even have to agree with me. But that doesn't mean we have to fight. And it doesn't mean, that we can't be friends either. There's room for everybody in this world. And I'm not going to deny myself, the space that I'm taking up now just to subdue myself for somebody else. I am here. I am out there. And if you don't like it, and if you don't agree with it, then that's fine. You can stay over there with your people. I'm going to stay over here with mine. But there's something very real to be said about that authenticity. So I think everybody really needs to ask themselves, what do I want? Answer that question, because I promise you, once you see it, your life will change.
I love it. Such empowerment. All right, let me ask you about Doug. Okay, your husband now.
Okay.
So when you described him, I mean, he sounds wonderful, but with three different words, characteristics, can you describe what type of person you feel like, or any changes in your life? Describe Doug.
My husband, Doug, very easy. He's gentle, he's patient, and, for lack of better words, kind. But I've never seen this depth of kindness in a human being before. I mean, he's just has such a forgiving heart. I have seen people walk all over him and treat him like crap, but he's always okay. It just doesn't faze him. He's still smiling. He'll be like, it bothers me, brush it off, and he moves on. And I think being with somebody like that, number one, is good for my nervous system.
Yeah.
Coming out of what I went through. But what I love that he challenges me to meet him where he's at. You know what? I want to rise to that level. I want to be that person. I'm a little spicy, he says, so I'm not as easily like, oh, I'm just going to brush that off. I'm more like a
Right.
chihuahua that's like, and then I calm down, whereas he was more like a lab, just kind of gentle and okay with
Oh,
everything. But I love that, you know, I love seeing couples like us that they challenge you to be better. They challenge you to be more. And there's, again, it's like life. There's room for everybody. And it's a beautiful thing. But I just never, it's so hard because people call themselves, like I said, broken and damaged. And it's like, no, you're affected, but there's nothing wrong with you. And you need to find that person that makes you feel like you're fully whole and you're entirely capable and have the same potential as any other human being, because in reality we all do.
love it. I love it. All right. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we get on this episode? Or before the wheel, the last question of the wheel.
I don't know, I'm kind of excited for that wheel.
All right, well, let me share my screen. We'll bring it on, and
All
then you can
right.
think about what you also need to, add to it. All right. All right. Do you see the wheel?
I see it.
All right, let's do it. Everybody is beginning to love the wheel. Oh, superpower.
Oh,
Ooh. So if you had a superpower or one that you would develop, what would it be? What superpower would it be?
that's a good one. Um, you know, I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind, and I feel like it would be a curse almost, but I'd love to know what people are really thinking. Like, because what people say, doesn't always match up. And I mean, I include my husband in this, but there are times I look at him like I know he's being gentle and nice, or, he doesn't want to hurt any. No, I want to know what everybody's thinking. Because I don't know, it might be a cruel thing to just say what you feel all the time, but I prefer directness. I would rather somebody come to my face and say, I don't like you. I don't have a reason, or maybe I have 5 million, but I just don't like you. I'd be like, well, then we're not going to be friends, are we? But I'd rather them say that than put on these pretenses. Maybe it's, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's those masks. I don't like those masks. I like honesty and purity. So I'm going to go with that. I want to know
Oh, I
what
love it.
everybody's thinking.
Hey, you and my mother-in-law, she used to say, I'm not going to tell you any white lies. I'm going to tell you how it is. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
so you always knew where she stood with you.
Yes, I've often been accused of that. Even my husband says, "You speak every thought you have, don't you?" Yes, I do.
Well, you know what? And that is perfectly fine. Everybody has to have their thing, that they're comfortable with. And I understand completely. All right. So before we say goodbye, I want you to think of an inspirational message that you could give anybody.
Here's what I will say. Coming from not just a childhood, but a 25-year long relationship where everything was dictated to me, everything, what I could say, what I could wear, what I could do, who I could be friends with, everything. If anyone is ever trying to control you or change you in any way, please remember who you are. Please remember that there are people in this world who think you are perfectly fine exactly as you are. They might even see your flaws, and they might even see weaknesses, and they might even wish you were different in certain slight ways. But somebody who really loves you is going to love all of those parts of you without wanting to change you.
I love it. All right. I'm not going to say anything else because I
Okay.
absolutely love that. So if you resonated with this podcast, this episode, and you know that somebody else would really benefit from, please share it with them. And I'm going to put where you can find Dana, all the information about her in the notes so that you can also reach out to her if you absolutely need her support as well. So I hope to see you soon, and I will see you next week.